I always believed that family came first. That belief shaped every decision I made for 28 years of my life, leading me down a path of endless sacrifices that I thought were acts of love. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I learned the difference between being loved and being used. Growing up as the eldest of 3 children in a middle-class family in Portland, Oregon, I was taught early that responsibility was my burden to bear. My parents, Linda and Frank Martinez, worked hard to provide for us, but there was always an unspoken expectation that I would be the one to pick up the slack. Our house on Maple Street was a modest 2-story colonial with peeling paint and a front porch that sagged slightly under the weight of 2 mini Oregon winters. Inside, the walls were thin enough that you could hear every conversation, every argument, every whispered concern about money that seemed to plague our household with increasing frequency. When my younger brother Jake struggled with his grades during his sophomore year of high school, I spent my evenings at the kitchen table with him instead of focusing on my own college applications. I remember the way the yellow overhead light cast harsh shadows across his frustrated face as he struggled with algebra problems that seemed impossible to him but elementary to me. While my friends were attending college fairs and writing scholarship essays, I was explaining the same mathematical concepts over and over again, watching Jake's attention drift to his phone or the television in the next room. My mother would hover nearby, wringing her hands and occasionally interjecting with unhelpful comments about how Jake was just different and needed extra support. My father would retreat to his workshop in the basement, the sound of his woodworking tools drowning out the tension that filled our living spaces. When my sister Emma wanted to join the prestigious Westbrook Dance Academy across town, a decision that would cost the family nearly $800 per month in tuition and fees, I took on extra shifts at the local grocery store to help cover the expenses. I was 16 at the time, working 25 hours per week on top of my full course load of advanced placement classes. I remember the burning ache in my feet after 8-hour shifts standing at the checkout counter, scanning items and bagging groceries while maintaining a cheerful demeanor for customers who sometimes treated teenage workers as if they were invisible. The money I earned went directly into a family fund that my mother managed, supposedly for Emma's dance training but increasingly for general household expenses that seemed to multiply faster than anyone could explain. Emma herself seemed oblivious to the sacrifice I was making for her dreams. She would come home from dance practice glowing with excitement about new routines she was learning or competitions she might qualify for, never asking how the family was managing to afford her expensive hobby. When I occasionally hinted that I was tired from working so much, she would suggest that I didn't have to work if I didn't want to, as if the family's financial situation was somehow optional rather than desperately necessary. My parents reinforced this attitude by praising Emma's dedication to her art while treating my work schedule as a personal choice rather than a family necessity. The pattern of sacrifice and enabling continued to escalate throughout my high school years. When Jake decided he wanted to attend a summer arts camp that cost $3,000, I used my entire college savings account to make it possible. When Emma needed new dance costumes and equipment, I sold my car and took the bus to work instead. When my father lost his job at the manufacturing plant due to downsizing, I increased my work hours to full-time and graduated high school through evening classes, a decision that eliminated any possibility of attending college immediately after graduation. Despite these mounting sacrifices, I maintained a sense of pride in my role as the family provider. I told myself that I was demonstrating maturity and love, that my siblings would remember my support when they became successful adults, that my parents appreciated my dedication even if they didn't always express it directly. I convinced myself that delaying my own education and dreams was a temporary setback that would ultimately benefit everyone, including myself, when the family's financial situation improved. The pattern continued into my adult years with even greater intensity. After finally completing my accounting degree through night school at Portland Community College, a process that took me 6 years instead of the traditional 4, I landed a good job at McKinsey & Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm downtown. The position paid $48,000 annually, which felt like a fortune after years of minimum wage work, but I quickly discovered that my increased earning capacity only amplified my family's expectations for financial support. Instead of moving out and starting my independent life like most of my peers, I remained in my childhood bedroom and handed over the majority of my paycheck to address various family financial crises. My parents had accumulated significant debt over the years, partly due to my father's gambling problem that everyone in the family acknowledged, but no one was willing to address directly. He would disappear for entire weekends, claiming to be visiting friends or attending work-related events, only to return home with empty pockets and elaborate stories about unexpected expenses or stolen wallets. The family's credit cards were maxed out, the mortgage was frequently behind, and utility companies sent disconnection notices with alarming regularity. My mother, Linda, had developed her own expensive habits that she justified as necessary for maintaining the family's social standing in the community. She insisted on shopping at upscale grocery stores because she claimed the food quality was better for the family's health, even though these purchases often cost twice as much as equivalent items at discount retailers. She maintained memberships at an expensive gym and spa, explaining that physical fitness was an investment in her ability to work and support the family, despite the fact that she had been unemployed for over 2 years. She purchased designer clothing and accessories whenever she felt depressed about the family's financial situation, claiming that looking professional was essential for job interviews, even though she rarely actually applied for positions. Every month, I handed over 60% of my salary to cover household expenses, my father's gambling debts, and various family emergencies that seemed to arise with suspicious regularity. The remaining 40% had to cover my own transportation, clothing, personal expenses, and any attempt at building savings for my future. I calculated that at this rate, I would never be able to afford my own apartment, much less save for retirement or other long-term goals. When I occasionally raised concerns about this arrangement, my family would respond with a combination of guilt and deflection that made me feel selfish for even questioning their financial dependence on my income. Jake's college years brought an entirely new level of financial pressure. He had decided to pursue a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at Pacific Coast College, a private institution that cost nearly $40,000 per year in tuition alone. When he was rejected for sufficient financial aid, I co-signed student loans for the full amount without fully understanding the long-term implications for my own financial security. My parents assured me that Jake would be responsible for repaying the loans once he graduated and found work in his field, but they also made it clear that the family was counting on me to ensure the payments were made if Jake encountered any difficulties. In addition to co-signing Jake's educational loans, I found myself covering his living expenses throughout his college years. He called home regularly with requests for money to cover textbooks, art supplies, rent deposits, car repairs, and social activities that he claimed were essential for his networking and professional development. Each request was presented as a one-time emergency that wouldn't be repeated, but the pattern continued month after month for 4 years. By the time Jake was supposed to graduate, I had provided him with over $15,000 in additional support beyond the original loan obligations. Emma's dance training evolved into increasingly expensive pursuits as she progressed through her teenage years. What had started as local classes and competitions expanded to include travel across the country for specialized workshops and auditions. She needed professional headshots that cost $800, specialized costumes for competitions that cost between $200 and $500 each, and coaching sessions with renowned instructors who charged premium rates for their expertise. When she turned 18, she announced her intention to move to Los Angeles to pursue professional opportunities in dance and choreography, a decision that would require ongoing financial support for rent, transportation, and basic living expenses in one of the most expensive cities in the country. Rather than questioning the wisdom of supporting Emma's expensive and uncertain career path, my family treated her ambitions as if they were guaranteed investments that would eventually benefit everyone. My mother spoke constantly about how proud she would be when Emma became famous, how the family would be able to attend red carpet events and meet celebrities, how Emma's success would vindicate all the sacrifices that had been made on her behalf. My father, despite his own financial irresponsibility, would lecture me about the importance of supporting Emma's dreams and how successful people in the entertainment industry always had families who believed in them from the beginning. The emotional manipulation that accompanied these financial demands became increasingly sophisticated over time. My family developed an intricate system of guilt, praise, and emotional punishment that kept me trapped in my role as the primary provider. When I complied with their request for money, I was praised as a loving daughter and sister who understood the importance of family loyalty. When I hesitated or asked questions about how the money would be used, I was accused of being selfish, controlling, and suspicious of people who loved me. When I occasionally refused to provide money for what I considered unnecessary expenses, I was subjected to days or weeks of cold treatment, passive-aggressive comments, and lectures about how disappointed they were in my lack of family commitment. The first real crack in my perception came during Jake's junior year of college. I had been faithfully making his loan payments for 2 years, sending him monthly allowances for living expenses, and covering various emergencies that seemed to arise with increasing frequency. The total amount I had provided for his education and support was approaching $60,000, a sum that represented years of careful saving and sacrifice on my part. I was proud of my ability to make his education possible and looked forward to his graduation and entry into the professional art world. The truth came out in the most casual way possible. During a family dinner in March, my aunt mentioned that she had run into Jake at a coffee shop in downtown Portland where he was working as a barista. She commented on how nice it was that he had found a job in the city and asked when he would be finishing his degree. The confusion on her face when my parents quickly changed the subject made me realize that something was wrong with the story I had been told about Jake's academic progress. After dinner, I confronted Jake directly about his current status at Pacific Coast College. Initially, he tried to maintain the fiction that he was still enrolled and making good progress toward graduation. When I pressed for specific details about his courses and professors, his story began to fall apart. Eventually, he admitted that he had dropped out after his first semester of junior year, more than 18 months earlier, to pursue what he called real-world experience in the art community. The scope of his deception was breathtaking. For over a year and a half, he had been cashing the checks I sent for living expenses while living in a shared apartment in Portland's Arts District and working part-time jobs that barely covered his basic needs. He had no intention of returning to college and had apparently never seriously considered how his decision would affect the family members who were supporting his education. When I asked him why he hadn't told me about his decision to drop out, he shrugged and said he never asked me to pay for his loans anyway, so it wasn't really my business what he did with his time. The financial implications of Jake's deception were staggering. I was still legally responsible for the student loans that were accumulating interest despite his non-enrollment. The money I had been sending for his living expenses had been supporting a lifestyle that had nothing to do with education or career preparation. The sacrifices I had made to support his college education had been completely wasted, and I was now facing years of loan payments for an education that would never be completed. Even more devastating than the financial impact was my family's reaction to this revelation. Instead of supporting me in my rightful anger and disappointment, they rallied around Jake and treated me as if I was the problem. My mother accused me of being controlling and trying to live vicariously through my siblings because I had chosen what she called a boring and safe career path. She suggested that my anger about Jake's deception was really jealousy of his artistic freedom and willingness to take risks. My father, despite his own history of financial irresponsibility, lectured me about the difference between supporting someone's dreams and trying to control their choices. Emma chimed in that I was being dramatic and unrealistic about Jake's situation. She pointed out that many successful artists had unconventional educational paths and suggested that Jake's real-world experience might be more valuable than a traditional degree anyway. She accused me of trying to force Jake into a conventional lifestyle that didn't suit his personality and artistic temperament. The entire family seemed to have decided that my financial support was an obligation rather than a gift, and any attempt to question how that support was being used made me the unreasonable and controlling family member. Despite this devastating wake-up call about my family's willingness to deceive and manipulate me, I found myself unable to break free from the patterns that had defined my adult life. The guilt and conditioning that had been building for years made it almost impossible to imagine setting boundaries or refusing to provide financial support. I convinced myself that Jake's deception was an aberration, that the family was going through a difficult period, and that my continued support was more important than ever during this time of crisis and transition. I continued making Jake's loan payments while he pursued his artistic interests in Portland's creative community. I picked up the increased household expenses when my father lost another job due to his gambling problems becoming known to his employer. I even helped Emma rent an apartment in Los Angeles when she decided to move there immediately after high school graduation to pursue acting and dance opportunities. Each of these financial commitments required me to take on additional work, cut my personal expenses even further, and postpone any plans for my own independence and financial security. The financial strain was crushing me both literally and figuratively. I was working 50-hour weeks at my primary job and taking on freelance bookkeeping projects on weekends just to generate enough income to keep everyone afloat. My own living situation remained unchanged. I slept in my childhood bedroom with its faded pink wallpaper and twin bed, surrounded by high school memorabilia and college textbooks that reminded me of dreams I had postponed indefinitely. I had no savings account, no retirement fund, no emergency reserves, and no prospect of ever purchasing my own home or building the independent life that most people my age took for granted. My social life had virtually disappeared under the weight of work and family obligations. Friends from college had moved on to marriages, career advancement, home ownership, and other adult milestones while I remained trapped in an adolescent role within my family system. When I occasionally made plans to meet friends for dinner or social activities, family emergencies would invariably arise that required my immediate attention and financial resources. Eventually, most of my friendships faded away as people grew tired of my constant cancellations and unavailability for normal social activities. The emotional toll was perhaps even worse than the financial burden. Every family gathering became an exercise in walking on eggshells, carefully monitoring my words and facial expressions to avoid triggering accusations of negativity or selfishness. If I seemed tired or stressed from working excessive hours to support everyone, I was accused of bringing down the family mood and being ungrateful for the love and support I received from them. If I tried to discuss budgets, financial planning, or sustainable spending habits, I was labeled controlling and obsessive about money. If I mentioned my own needs, dreams, or concerns about the future, I was called selfish and reminded of how much the family had sacrificed for my education and opportunities. The message that emerged from these interactions was clear and consistent. My role within the family was to provide financial and emotional support while asking for nothing in return. My feelings, needs, and concerns were seen as secondary to everyone else's comfort and convenience. My financial contribution was treated as a given rather than a generous gift. And any suggestion that this arrangement might be unsustainable or unfair was met with emotional manipulation designed to make me feel guilty for even questioning the family dynamics. This toxic relationship pattern reached its absolute breaking point on my 28th birthday, an event that I had been planning and anticipating for weeks as a rare opportunity to focus on my own happiness and celebration. I had been working additional freelance projects for months to save enough money for a special birthday dinner at Le Bernardin, an upscale French restaurant downtown that I had dreamed of trying for years. It would be the first time in recent memory that I spent a significant amount of money on myself for something that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival or work. I had even purchased a new dress for the occasion, a beautiful navy blue cocktail dress with delicate beading around the neckline that made me feel elegant and confident in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. I had made reservations for 5 people at the restaurant, planning to treat my family to dinner as part of my birthday celebration, and had arranged to take the following day off work so I could fully enjoy the evening without worrying about early morning responsibilities. The morning of my birthday started beautifully. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the sound of birds singing in the maple tree outside. For once, I felt genuinely excited about the day ahead and proud of the celebration I had planned. I spent extra time getting ready, doing my hair and makeup carefully, and putting on the new dress that made me feel like the successful professional woman I was trying to become. At exactly 10:30 that morning, my mother called with what she described as a small family emergency that needed immediate attention. Emma had received an unexpected callback for a major movie audition, something that could potentially change the trajectory of her entire career. The audition was scheduled for that same evening in San Francisco, requiring last-minute travel arrangements that the family couldn't afford without my help. My mother explained that Emma needed money for a round-trip flight to San Francisco, one night's accommodation at a decent hotel near the audition location. Professional audition attire, since her existing wardrobe wasn't sophisticated enough for this level of opportunity, and various incidental expenses related to travel and professional presentation. The total cost would be nearly $1,500, money that would have to come from the carefully saved funds I had allocated for my birthday celebration. I hesitated for the first time in years, feeling a strange combination of disappointment and rebellion that I had never experienced before. This was my birthday, my one carefully planned day to feel special and prioritized within my family. I had been looking forward to this celebration for months, working extra hours and denying myself small pleasures to make it financially possible. The idea of canceling my own birthday dinner to fund Emma's last-minute travel seemed particularly cruel, especially given her history of treating my financial support as an entitlement rather than a generous gift. But my mother's voice carried that familiar tone of emotional manipulation that had controlled my decisions for so many years. She talked about family loyalty and the importance of supporting each other during crucial moments. She reminded me that Emma's big break could potentially change everything for our family's financial situation, transforming us from a struggling household into one that was financially secure and socially prominent. She emphasized that birthdays happen every year, but opportunities like this were truly once in a lifetime, suggesting that I would regret it forever if I didn't support my sister's dreams at this critical moment. She also deployed more subtle forms of guilt, mentioning how proud she was of my success and maturity, how much the family depended on my good judgment and generous spirit, and how Emma had specifically asked for me to be the one to make this opportunity possible because she trusted my love and support more than anyone else's. The combination of praise, guilt, and emotional pressure created a psychological trap that felt impossible to escape, despite every instinct in my body screaming that this request was unreasonable and manipulative. Against every rational thought in my head and the growing voice of self-preservation that was begging me to say no, I found myself agreeing to transfer the money. I canceled my birthday dinner reservations, returned the dress I had purchased for the celebration, and spent my 28th birthday evening alone in my childhood bedroom, eating leftover pizza from the refrigerator and watching Netflix on my laptop while wondering when I had become so completely invisible in my own life. Emma texted me a brief, "Thanks sis," message from the airport but didn't mention my birthday at all, despite the fact that funding her trip had required canceling my own celebration. Jake, who had apparently been informed about the audition funding but not about what it had cost me personally, never acknowledged my birthday either. My parents seemed to have genuinely forgotten that it was my special day once Emma's crisis took precedence, treating my sacrifice as so natural and expected that it didn't warrant special recognition or gratitude. The next morning brought the cruelest revelation of all, one that would fundamentally change my understanding of my family's treatment of me. While scrolling through social media during my lunch break at work, I discovered that Emma had used the money I had given her not just for the audition, but for an extended romantic weekend vacation in San Francisco with her boyfriend Marcus, whom she had been dating secretly for several months without telling the family. Her Instagram account was filled with photos of expensive restaurants where she and Marcus were enjoying elaborate multi-course meals, shopping trips to designer boutiques where she was purchasing items that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month, and tourist attractions like Alcatraz and the Golden Gate Bridge that had nothing to do with audition preparation. The audition she had described as a life-changing emergency had apparently taken place as scheduled, but it was clearly just a convenient excuse to fund a luxury vacation at my expense. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Timestamps on the photos showed that she had spent less than 2 hours at the audition location but 3 full days exploring San Francisco's most expensive entertainment options. She had purchased new clothing and accessories that were clearly for leisure rather than professional purposes. She and Marcus had stayed at a luxury hotel that cost far more than the modest accommodation she had claimed to need for the audition. The total amount she had spent appeared to exceed even the $1,500 I had provided, suggesting that she had been planning this trip for some time and had simply used my money as part of a larger vacation budget. When I called Emma to confront her about this deception, her response revealed the true depth of her sense of entitlement to my financial support. Rather than apologizing for lying about the purpose of the money or acknowledging that she had manipulated me into funding her vacation, she accused me of stalking her social media and invading her privacy by looking at posts she had shared publicly. She claimed that she deserved to have some fun and relaxation after the stress of the audition process, and that I was being petty and controlling for tracking how she spent what she called family money. Emma further argued that the audition had been real and important, so technically she hadn't lied about needing to travel to San Francisco for professional purposes. The fact that she had extended the trip for personal enjoyment was, in her view, a reasonable decision that didn't require my approval or input. She seemed genuinely unable to understand why I was upset about her deception, treating my anger as an overreaction to a minor misunderstanding rather than a justified response to deliberate manipulation and lies. When I insisted that she had deliberately misled me about the purpose and scope of her trip, Emma became defensive and accusatory. She claimed that I was trying to control her life and monitor her every decision, that I was being unreasonably suspicious of someone who had never given me reason to distrust her. She accused me of being jealous of her opportunities and relationship, suggesting that my anger was really about my own loneliness and lack of romantic prospects rather than her dishonesty about the money. The conversation ended with Emma hanging up on me after declaring that she was an adult who could make her own decisions about how to spend money that had been given to her freely. She seemed to genuinely believe that my financial contribution had come with no strings attached, and that questioning her use of the funds was an invasion of her autonomy rather than a reasonable response to discovered deception. When I brought this situation to the attention of the rest of my family, their reactions revealed the true nature of our relationships in ways that were both devastating and illuminating. Jake, despite his own history of financial deception and irresponsibility, immediately sided with Emma and accused me of being controlling and invasive. He argued that Emma was an adult who deserved privacy in her personal relationships and spending decisions, conveniently ignoring the fact that the money in question had come from my personal savings and birthday fund. Jake further suggested that I was being hypocritical by expecting detailed accounting of how Emma spent the money, given that the family had always operated on trust and mutual support. He seemed unable or unwilling to recognize the difference between providing financial support with transparent communication and being deliberately deceived about the purpose and scope of that support. His response made it clear that he viewed my financial contributions as obligations that came with no right to honesty or basic respect. My parents' reaction was perhaps the most disappointing of all. Rather than addressing Emma's dishonesty and manipulation directly, they focused exclusively on what they perceived as my negative attitude and unreasonable expectations. My mother accused me of becoming bitter and resentful, suggesting that my anger about Emma's deception was really a symptom of deeper psychological problems related to my single status and career focus. She implied that I was using financial control as a way to insert myself into my siblings' lives because I didn't have a romantic relationship or children of my own to focus on. My father, despite his own extensive history of financial deception and irresponsibility, lectured me about the importance of trust within families and the damage that suspicion and monitoring could do to loving relationships. He suggested that Emma's decision to extend her trip for personal enjoyment was actually a healthy sign of her growing independence and self-care, something that I should celebrate rather than criticize. He seemed completely unable to acknowledge that being deliberately misled about the purpose of my financial support was a legitimate reason for concern and anger. The family's collective response created a narrative in which Emma was a young woman making reasonable decisions about her life and career, while I was a controlling and suspicious older sister who was using money as a weapon to manipulate and monitor my siblings' behavior. They had somehow transformed a clear case of deception and manipulation into a story about my psychological problems and unreasonable expectations, effectively making me the villain in a situation where I was clearly the victim. That moment of clarity was both devastating and liberating in ways that I struggled to fully comprehend at the time. I realized that I wasn't a beloved family member whose sacrifices were appreciated and reciprocated. I was essentially a human ATM machine, valued only for my ability to provide financial resources with no questions asked and no expectations of honesty or gratitude in return. My feelings, my dreams, my own financial security, and even my right to basic honesty meant nothing to people who claimed to love me unconditionally. The family had created an elaborate narrative structure in which my giving was not only expected but mandatory, while their taking was not only justified but virtuous. Any questioning of this dynamic, any attempt to set boundaries or expect reciprocity, any expression of my own needs or concerns was automatically reframed as selfishness, control, or psychological dysfunction on my part. They had developed a sophisticated system of emotional manipulation that made it almost impossible for me to advocate for myself without being made to feel guilty and unreasonable. The decision to fundamentally change my relationship with my family didn't come easily or quickly. I spent weeks wrestling with guilt, fear, and decades of psychological conditioning that told me family loyalty required unlimited sacrifice and unconditional support. The voices in my head that had been shaped by years of manipulation told me that I was being selfish and ungrateful, that good daughters and sisters didn't abandon their families during difficult times, that my anger and resentment were character flaws that I needed to overcome rather than legitimate responses to mistreatment. I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Williams, who specialized in family dynamics and codependency issues. The first few sessions were incredibly difficult as I tried to explain my family situation without making myself sound like the victim or my family members sound like villains. Dr. Williams helped me understand that healthy family relationships require reciprocity, mutual respect, and honest communication, elements that had been absent from my family dynamics for years. She taught me to recognize the difference between supporting people I loved and enabling destructive behavior that ultimately hurt everyone involved. Through therapy, I began to understand that my family's treatment of me met the clinical definition of financial abuse, a form of domestic violence that involves controlling someone through manipulation of financial resources and economic dependency. The constant demands for money, the emotional punishment when I hesitated to provide support, the deliberate deception about how my contributions were being used, and the systematic isolation from friends and independent activities all constituted a pattern of abuse that was damaging my mental health and preventing my normal adult development. Dr. Williams helped me recognize that my guilt about setting boundaries was a conditioned response that had been deliberately cultivated by people who benefited from my inability to say no. She taught me that real love doesn't require the sacrifice of one's own well-being, and that healthy families celebrate each member's independence and success rather than exploiting their resources and generosity. She helped me understand that my family's resistance to boundaries wasn't evidence that I was being selfish, but rather proof that the current dynamic was unhealthy and unsustainable. I also consulted with a financial advisor, Maria Rodriguez, who helped me understand exactly how much my family's financial dependence had cost me in terms of lost savings, retirement planning, and personal financial security. The numbers were staggering. Over the previous 10 years, I had provided more than $120,000 in direct financial support to various family members, not including the opportunity cost of investments and savings that I could have been building during that time. Maria helped me calculate that if I had been saving and investing the money I had been giving to my family, I would currently have enough for a substantial down payment on a house, a healthy emergency fund, and a growing retirement account that would ensure my financial security in later life. Instead, I had nothing to show for my years of sacrifice except continued dependence from family members who showed no signs of developing financial responsibility or independence. Armed with professional support and a slowly growing understanding of my own worth and rights, I began the terrifying process of setting boundaries with my family. The first step was the most difficult and symbolic. I decided to move out of my childhood home and into my own apartment, a decision that would physically and emotionally separate me from the daily manipulation and pressure that had kept me trapped in my dysfunctional role for so many years. Finding an apartment that I could afford on the reduced income that would result from ending my financial support to the family was more challenging than I had anticipated. Years of giving away the majority of my salary had left me with no savings for security deposits, moving expenses, or furniture. I had to take on additional freelance work for several months just to accumulate enough money for the basic cost of establishing an independent household. I eventually found a small one-bedroom apartment in southeast Portland, about 20 minutes from my childhood home, but far enough away to create psychological distance from the family dynamics that had controlled my life for so long. The apartment was in an older building with thin walls and no air conditioning, but it had large windows that let in natural light and a small balcony where I could grow herbs and flowers. Most importantly, it was mine alone, a space where I could make decisions based on my own needs and preferences rather than constantly accommodating everyone else's demands and expectations. The process of furnishing my apartment became an exercise in discovering my own taste and preferences, things that had been suppressed for so long that I barely remembered what I actually liked versus what was practical or expected. I spent hours in furniture stores and home goods shops, touching fabrics and examining color schemes, trying to identify what appealed to me rather than what would be most acceptable to my family or most conducive to their comfort when they visited. I chose a comfortable sofa in deep green velvet that reminded me of the forest around Portland, a dining table with warm wood tones that could accommodate friends for dinner parties I hoped to eventually host, and artwork that reflected my own aesthetic preferences rather than the bland, inoffensive decorating style that had dominated my childhood home. Each purchase felt like an act of rebellion and self-discovery, a small step toward building a life that reflected my own values and desires. I didn't ask my family for permission to move or engage in lengthy explanations about my decision. I simply informed them that I was relocating and would no longer be contributing to household expenses, effective immediately. I offered to help them create a realistic budget based on their own income and to assist with finding resources for financial planning and debt management. But I made it clear that my role as the family's primary financial provider was ending permanently. The reaction from my family was swift, dramatic, and entirely predictable based on their historical patterns of emotional manipulation. My mother cried and accused me of abandoning the family during their greatest time of need, claiming that my decision to move out was a betrayal of everything she had taught me about loyalty and love. She called me selfish and ungrateful, reminding me of all the sacrifices she and my father had made during my childhood and suggesting that my current success was entirely due to their support and encouragement. My father alternated between explosive anger and pathetic self-pity, claiming that I was destroying the family unit with my selfishness and unrealistic expectations. He accused me of thinking I was better than the rest of the family because of my education and professional success, suggesting that I had become arrogant and condescending toward people who had always loved and supported me. He threatened to cut off all contact with me if I went through with my plan to move out, then immediately reversed course and begged me to reconsider my decision for the sake of family unity. Jake's response was perhaps the most revealing of all. Rather than expressing any understanding of my need for independence or appreciation for the years of financial support I had provided, he immediately demanded to know who was going to make his student loan payments now that I was abandoning my responsibilities. He seemed genuinely unable to comprehend that the loan payments had been my voluntary contribution rather than a permanent obligation that would automatically transfer to someone else in my absence. Jake accused me of being vindictive and punitive, suggesting that my decision to stop making his loan payments was motivated by revenge rather than financial necessity. He claimed that I was trying to sabotage his future prospects and force him into bankruptcy out of jealousy for his artistic freedom and unconventional lifestyle. He seemed completely oblivious to the irony of accusing me of sabotage while expecting me to indefinitely support loans for an education he had abandoned years earlier. Emma's reaction was equally self-centered and revealing. Rather than acknowledging any responsibility for the deception that had triggered my decision to establish boundaries, she accused me of being jealous of her opportunities and trying to sabotage her career out of spite and resentment. She claimed that my refusal to continue providing financial support was evidence of my jealousy of her youth, beauty, and romantic relationship, suggesting that I was a bitter older sister who couldn't stand to see her siblings succeed and find happiness. Emma further argued that my decision to move out and stop providing money was actually an attempt to force the family to choose between supporting her dreams and maintaining a relationship with me. She positioned herself as the victim of my emotional manipulation, claiming that I was using financial control to punish her for being honest about her needs and desires. She seemed completely unable to recognize the contradiction between accusing me of financial control while simultaneously demanding continued access to my financial resources. The family's attempts to guilt me back into my old role became increasingly desperate and sophisticated over the following weeks. They enlisted extended family members, family friends, and even former neighbors to call and express their disappointment in my decision to abandon my family responsibilities. These well-meaning but misguided individuals had clearly been given a distorted version of the situation that portrayed me as an ungrateful daughter who had turned her back on family members who needed her support. My Aunt Rosa called to lecture me about the importance of family loyalty and to share stories about her own sacrifices for her children and siblings. She reminded me that family was the most important thing in life, and that I would regret my decision when my parents were older, and my Aunt Rosa called to lecture me about the importance of family loyalty and to share stories about her own sacrifices for her children and siblings. She reminded me that family was the most important thing in life, and that I would regret my decision when my parents were older and needed care themselves. She painted vivid pictures of me sitting alone in a nursing home someday, abandoned by family members who remembered how I had turned my back on them during their time of need. My grandmother, despite being in her 80s and dealing with her own health issues, was apparently recruited to call and express her disappointment in my behavior. She spoke in a weak, trembling voice about how she had raised her children to stick together through thick and thin, and how heartbroken she was to see her granddaughter breaking apart the family over money. She reminded me that she had lived through the Great Depression and understood the value of family support during difficult times, implying that my generation was too selfish and individualistic to understand real hardship. Even my former high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, somehow got involved in the campaign to change my mind. She called to express surprise that the responsible and family-oriented student she remembered had grown into someone who would abandon her family obligations. She shared memories of how proud I had seemed when talking about supporting my siblings' dreams and suggested that I might be going through a difficult phase that was causing me to make decisions I would later regret. The most painful manipulation attempt came from my family's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Chen, whose daughter had been my best friend throughout elementary school. She called to tell me how much she admired the way I had always put my family first, and how sad she was to hear that I was going through a rebellious phase that was causing problems for people who loved me. She offered to mediate family discussions and suggested that perhaps everyone could reach a compromise that would address my concerns while maintaining family unity. Each of these conversations followed the same basic script. I was portrayed as a previously wonderful family member who had somehow lost her way and was making destructive decisions that hurt people who cared about me. The family had clearly crafted a narrative that portrayed them as victims of my sudden and inexplicable selfishness, while positioning themselves as loving and concerned relatives who just wanted me to return to my senses and resume my proper role within the family structure. What made these interventions particularly insidious was the way they played on my deepest fears and insecurities. I had always worried about being alone in the world, about not having people who truly cared about me, about making decisions that I would regret in old age. The family's manipulation campaign was carefully designed to exploit these vulnerabilities and make me believe that choosing independence and self-respect would inevitably lead to isolation and regret. I held firm in my decision to move out and establish boundaries, but it required every ounce of strength and determination I possessed. I continued working with Dr. Williams to process the guilt and fear that the manipulation campaign was designed to trigger. She helped me understand that healthy families don't recruit extended networks to pressure individual members into submission, and that the intensity of their reaction was actually evidence that my decision was necessary and appropriate. Dr. Williams also helped me recognize that the family's version of events, which they were sharing with anyone who would listen, bore little resemblance to the actual facts of our relationships. They had edited out years of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and deliberate deception, creating a story that portrayed me as an inexplicably cruel daughter and sister who had suddenly turned against people who had always loved and supported me. The process of moving into my own apartment was both liberating and terrifying. For the first time in my adult life, I woke up in a space that belonged entirely to me, where I could make decisions about everything from what to have for breakfast to how to spend my evening without considering the needs and demands of family members. The silence in my apartment was initially unsettling after years of living in a house filled with constant drama, financial crises, and emotional manipulation. I discovered that I had to relearn basic skills of independent living that most people develop in their early 20s. I had never had to manage a household budget based solely on my own needs and wants, never had to decide how to furnish a living space according to my own aesthetic preferences, never had to plan social activities without considering how they might impact my family's emotional state or financial needs. The first few weeks in my apartment were marked by a strange combination of relief and anxiety. I felt physically lighter without the constant pressure of family financial demands, but I also felt guilty for enjoying my newfound freedom. I would catch myself feeling happy about small things like buying groceries I actually wanted to eat or watching movies I enjoyed, then immediately feel selfish for taking pleasure in these basic aspects of independent adult life. I created a detailed budget that showed me exactly how much money I would have available for my own needs now that I was no longer supporting my family's lifestyle. The numbers were shocking. I could afford to save 25% of my income for retirement and emergency funds, build a substantial down payment for a house within 3 years, and still have enough left over for a comfortable lifestyle that included occasional travel, entertainment, and personal purchases. For the first time in years, I began making plans for my own future. I researched graduate programs in accounting and business that could advance my career prospects. I looked into professional development opportunities and industry certifications that could increase my earning potential. I even began thinking about long-term goals like homeownership, international travel, and retirement planning that had seemed impossible when most of my income was going to support other people's dreams and emergencies. The family's attempts to guilt me back into my old role became increasingly desperate and revealing as they realized I was serious about maintaining my boundaries. They tried everything from emotional manipulation to outright lies about financial emergencies that turned out to be fabricated when I asked for documentation. My father claimed to have received an eviction notice that didn't exist when I offered to call the landlord directly. My mother invented a medical emergency that was exposed as false when I asked for the name of the hospital where she was supposedly being treated. Jake showed up at my apartment one evening with what he claimed was a medical crisis requiring immediate financial assistance. He said he had been in a car accident and needed money for emergency room treatment and car repairs that weren't covered by insurance. When I asked to see the accident report and medical bills, he became evasive and eventually admitted that the accident had been a minor fender bender with no injuries and minimal damage that he could easily afford to repair with money from his part-time job. The most elaborate manipulation attempt came from Emma, who orchestrated an intervention-style family meeting designed to pressure me into resuming my financial support. She recruited my parents, Jake, and several extended family members to gather at my parents' house and invited me under the pretense of wanting to have an honest conversation about our family relationships and how to move forward in a healthy way. When I arrived at what I thought would be a productive family discussion, I found myself facing a room full of people who had clearly been coached to deliver specific messages about my selfishness and the damage I was causing to family unity. Each person took turns sharing prepared statements about how disappointed they were in my behavior and how much my decision to establish boundaries was hurting people who loved me. The intervention was carefully orchestrated to maximize emotional impact and minimize my ability to respond rationally. My grandmother was positioned prominently in the room, looking frail and sad while family members talked about how much my behavior was worrying her. Old family photos were displayed around the room, showing happier times when I had been fulfilling my expected role as the family provider. Several people spoke simultaneously, creating a cacophony of guilt and pressure that was designed to overwhelm my defenses and force me to capitulate to their demands. Emma had prepared a detailed presentation about her career prospects and how my continued financial support was essential for her success in the entertainment industry. She had created charts and graphs showing potential return on investment if her acting career took off, essentially arguing that supporting her dreams was a smart financial decision that would benefit the entire family. She spoke eloquently about family values and mutual support while conveniently ignoring her recent deception about the San Francisco trip. Jake presented a sob story about how my refusal to continue making his loan payments was destroying his credit and preventing him from pursuing legitimate career opportunities. He claimed that potential employers in the arts community were checking credit scores as part of their hiring process, and that my decision to stop supporting him was therefore directly sabotaging his professional prospects. He spoke passionately about sibling loyalty and how successful families support each other through difficult times. My parents delivered the most emotionally manipulative presentations of all. My mother cried while describing how lonely and worried she had become since I moved out, how the family home felt empty and sad without my presence, and how my siblings were suffering from the loss of their big sister's guidance and support. She painted vivid pictures of family holidays and celebrations that would never be the same without my participation, and spoke about her fears that I would become estranged from the family permanently. My father took a different approach, alternating between anger and disappointment while describing how my behavior was undermining his authority as the head of the household and creating chaos in what had previously been a stable and loving family environment. He accused me of being influenced by outside forces like my therapist and suggested that I was being manipulated by people who didn't understand the importance of family loyalty and tradition. The entire intervention was designed to make me feel isolated, selfish, and responsible for the emotional distress of people I loved. The family had clearly invested significant time and energy in planning this event, recruiting participants, and coaching everyone on their specific roles in the emotional manipulation campaign.